Use the teleport button to move forward into the chapel. Depending on your controller configuration, you can adjust the direction you'll be facing when you teleport, as shown by the arrow on the floor. Feel free to move around during your tour to get a better vantage point. Go ahead and try this now. We will begin shortly. You are standing in a virtual recreation of the Sistine Chapel. You have just walked through the entrance and are experiencing the work as the artist intended. This is how it was first seen by the people of Rome in December 1512. In our time, roughly 20,000 tourists a day are herded through this room, entering from a small door on the altar wall and exiting through a side door that will be installed in the 19th century. It is overwhelming. The mind reels. It's hard to focus on any one thing as you crane your neck and succumb to sensory visual overload. It was the German poet Goethe who said, "Until you have seen the Sistine Chapel, you can have no adequate conception of what one man is capable of accomplishing." Above you is over 6,000 square feet of painted fresco, largely created by one man. A man who didn't even want this job. Michelangelo Buonarroti, at age 33, was considered the greatest living sculptor after his creation of statues like the Pietà and the David. Some considered him the greatest living artist, period. One of these admirers was Pope Julius II. His uncle, Sixtus, had built this very chapel that bears his name when he was pope. At the time, the ceiling above you was covered in bright blue ultramarine paint with thousands of small gold stars. Pope Julius decided that he would add to his uncle's chapel and decorate its ceiling. He convened his Vatican artists to devise a plan. The artists, namely Donato Bramante, realized that this was going to be an extremely difficult task. He told Julius that he should award the ceiling commission to Michelangelo, the young sculptor from Florence. If he was indeed the greatest artist of our time, he would have no problem completing this commission. Unfortunately for Michelangelo, but fortunately for us, the Pope was convinced. All Bramante and his artist friends had to do was sit back and watch Michelangelo fail. Michelangelo pleaded with the Pope. He was a sculptor, not a painter. He had no experience painting fresco, but the Pope didn't care. So Michelangelo fled Rome, and the Pope sent an envoy to hunt him down and bring him back. When he refused, the ambassador said he would either decorate the Pope's ceiling or risk the invasion of Florence, his hometown. Needless to say, back then you didn't say no to the Pope. The ceiling above you took 4 years to complete, from 1508 to 1512. This includes a brief meltdown in the middle where he again fled and again was brought back under guard by armed papal soldiers. During this time, Michelangelo painted the entire ceiling you see, everything from the top of the windows up. Let me remind you, it took Leonardo 6 years to complete this, which I'm placing here at actual size. Seriously. Michelangelo was originally commissioned to paint the 12 apostles over the windows, and some elaborate geometric designs above their heads filling the vault. This was a Herculean task, not just painting a huge curved vault 70 feet off the ground, but dealing with ever-changing sightlines that, from the floor, presented almost impossible problems of perspective and foreshortening. Michelangelo was not one to be intimidated by difficulties. He preferred them, sought them out, at times even created them. He told the Pope that the existing plan was boring, and he would come up with something new. If he was going to do something, he was going to own it. So here's this young guy who doesn't want the job, who isn't trained to do the job, but reluctantly accepts the commission and then decides to completely alter it to an unheard of level of ambition never before seen, not even in antiquity. So Michelangelo decides that the chapel as it exists now, with its Quattrocento frescoes on the walls depicting the lives of Moses and Christ, what is missing is everything that came before. He will literally paint biblical Genesis surrounded by the Old Testament prophets and pagan Greek symbols who foretold the coming of Christ. In the four corners, he will depict Old Testament Jewish heroes overcoming their enemies. He painted over 300 figures encased in this fictional painted architectural scheme, the first of its kind, that serves to unify and harmonize everything into a single coherent cosmic whole. Unsure of himself, Michelangelo had assembled a team of experts to help him. He started right above where you entered the chapel, painting the Great Flood and the prophet Zechariah. After having painted Zechariah, which is believed to be a portrait of Pope Julius himself, the Pope was very pleased. He said it was a superb work and that Michelangelo could decorate the rest of the chapel in any manner he wished, effectively silencing disgruntled papal scholars alarmed at his plan to decorate their most holy chapel with pagan images. The Vatican artists, upon seeing this portrait, ridiculed Michelangelo, saying that he did not know foreshortening or perspective, that he was essentially a fool. I'd like you to take a minute to look down the room at Jonah, who caps the other end of this vault. He leans backwards in his throne, but the vault is actually curving forwards. He stretches his legs out into the real space of the chapel. He and Haman to his left are two of the most virtuoso examples of foreshortening in the history of art. But let's get back to the flood. The scaffold had been disassembled, and viewing it from the ground for the first time, Michelangelo was very disappointed. Here, he had hired the best fresco painters in Italy, and under their guidance, he had created figures that were hardly discernible from the floor. He started to doubt himself. Perhaps Bramante and the others were right. Never one to waste energy on confrontation, though, he arrived the next morning and locked everyone out. Save for a few Florentine friends to aid him with preparations, he would do the rest himself, and the doors would remain locked. You'll notice that from here down the vault, the figures become larger. They all exist in 3 dimensions, as though they are occupying space amid the marble architecture. This is a sculptor painting. There are no lush environments or backgrounds, no incidental details whatsoever. These are massive giants, looming figures that demand our attention as individuals. Let's go over the central flattened section of the vault. What's depicted are the first 9 verses of Genesis, starting at the altar wall with God separating light from darkness and ending above you with the drunkenness of Noah. This is the biblical narrative, painted in reverse order, from sin to salvation. You have the fall of Noah, and you follow this back across 3 organized groups, portraying Adam and Eve and God creating the earth. Remember, the guy hesitant to paint 12 apostles has now decided to depict the creation of the entire universe. Notice this large marble fence erected on the floor, the transept. It was meant to divide members of the Vatican from the visiting faithful. If you look up, see how this feature divides the biblical narrative. God is only portrayed on the liturgical or Vatican side and does not cross over into the lay area of the room to mingle with us common folk. Flanking the biblical histories are the giants we spoke of, the Old Testament prophets and pagan sibyls who foretold the coming of Christ. They are superhumans that exist on a plane between God and the lower figures surrounding them. Those figures, in the triangular spandrels and rainbow-shaped lunettes above each window, are the ancestors of Christ. These are some of the most profoundly human images ever painted. This concludes our brief orientation. Now that you have your bearings, the trigger on the control in your hand will allow you to inspect figures and elements on the ceiling. When one is highlighted, press the trigger to start or stop hearing information about that selected item. You can move freely around the floor of the chapel, or select the aerial work platform in the corner to hop in and take a closer look like a Vatican conservator. To learn more about the creation of the Sistine ceiling, select the wooden scaffold in the opposite corner. We hope you enjoy this experience as much as we enjoyed making it. This is the actual aerial work platform that the Vatican conservators used to inspect the ceiling. Hold on, we're going to teleport up there. You can now press the touchpad to move around at this height. If you'd like to learn about the cleaning and restoration, click the dirty spandrel that is lit with a spotlight. To teleport back down, click on the chapel floor. Here, painted at the same time as the Quattrocento frescoes below them, are 28 predecessors to Pope Sixtus, each tucked away in his own false niche. Because the primary function of the chapel was to be the room where cardinals would elect a new pope, I suppose it made sense to have someone paint a history of popes. That said, these guys are easily the least photographed and discussed items in this room. These Quattrocento frescoes were painted when Michelangelo was a young boy, completed by some of the most famous early Renaissance artists in Italy. As I mentioned before, they depict the life of Moses and Christ and existed here when he began the ceiling project. Michelangelo put a lot of thought into how his work above would tell the tale of everything that came before. This experience isn't really about these frescoes on the walls, but if you click them, I'll tell you the title of the piece and the artist who created it. The pendentives in the four corners show Old Testament Jewish heroes overcoming their enemies. These are some of the most difficult surfaces to paint on. They essentially blend the walls and the ceiling together in the corners into one curving organic shape. You can now click on individual pendentives to learn more about them. This depicts Judith beheading Holofernes. The story of Judith may have been stripped from the Bible, voted out sometime in the early days of the church, but here Michelangelo presents Judith as David's full equal. Holofernes was an Assyrian general, and Judith was a beautiful widow. The Assyrians were camping outside the gates of her city, planning to burn the city to the ground the following day. At night, Judith snuck past the guards and went to Holofernes' tent. Once there, she seduced him. He drank too much wine and passed out. She then cut off his head and hung it from the gates. In the morning, the Assyrian troops, seeing their leader's head, panicked and fled. On the vault, you see Judith with her maidservant carrying off his head, while Holofernes' decapitated body sits in the background. There's also a guard sleeping in the upper left. This is Delivery of the Keys by Perugino. This is Delivery of the Keys by Perugino. This is the Sermon on the Mount by Rosselli.